Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. Tolkien fans are having a time. We are getting so much content now that the Amazon marketing machine has really revved up and is getting ready for the launch of The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power this September. So we had our poster reveals last week, and this week on Thursday, the 10th of February, Vanity Fair released a kind of first look article about The Rings of Power, very reminiscent of the first look article that was released about the Fellowship of the Ring back when that came out 20 odd years ago. And so today I guess I just want to share some what I hope are maybe a bit brief thoughts about it. I'm not intending to go into like too much nitty-gritty detail because I've been talking about this in lots of different platforms. And also, you know, information is coming out so quickly right now at this pace. So posters were last week, Vanity Fair was this Thursday, tomorrow, Sunday, it's actually today already because I'm recording this past midnight, we'll be getting the teaser trailer, which is going to be exciting. So, you know, rather than go really all in on every single release, I'll just talk about, I think, the things that really struck me. And if there's anything that really calls to me to make a longer video about, then I'll do so in future. So with that out of the way, let's dive into talking about the Vanity Fair article itself. By and large, I was encouraged by the content in the article. There were some things I was iffy about, but by and large, I was encouraged. One thing that I liked that the writers highlighted, the writers being Joanna Robinson and Anthony Breznican. I hope I pronounced your surname correctly, Anthony. One thing I liked that they highlighted was this idea that Tolkien like built up this whole history for Middle-earth and then collapsed it, and that's what we see in Lord of the Rings. And for me personally, I've talked about this in my first video on the channel, which I will link below for if you're interested, that was what first got me into Middle-earth, was basically as a kid, like, you know, walking through these landscapes and seeing these ruins, these ancient ruins of which contain stories long past and half forgotten, passing into legend, everything obscured by the mists of time. And that was something that really drew me to Middle-earth and was kind of like, that's what like stuck. That's what got me stuck into the world and what kind of hooked me from the beginning. So I liked how they highlighted that and used Tolkien's quote about it making the, like, being part of making the total effect and why people wanted to know so much more about Middle-earth, because it gave this idea, this almost authentic historical idea to the story because of the richness with which the world was developed, and how much, you know, took place in the background. The character, like, because you think about how we live every day, right? There's so much stuff happening in the background. I've lived in Europe for the past 6 years. The cities here are absolutely ancient, and you just pass all sorts of like monuments on your way and you don't even think about it. In the first town I moved to, there's a Roman aqueduct running through it, and it's like that's like 2,000 odd years old, and now it's just part of the landscape that we inhabit. So those kind of like unattainable vistas, I like that Joanna and Anthony highlighted that and talked about how like basically the writers need to acknowledge that and flesh that out and fill in the blank pages of the book when we actually have a very limited amount of canon material, even less that's licensed to Amazon to use. I like how the authors kind of highlighted from, I think it was actually within the first paragraph, that, or even within the lead, that this will basically sink or swim. This will either be a milestone in a positive way, or it will be a milestone as a cautionary tale about biting off more than you can chew. Which in many ways kind of resonates with, you know, the idea, like especially prior to Jackson filming his trilogy, that Lord of the Rings was unfilmable, and kind of like, you know, the adaptations that had come out before Jackson were like in their own way were good. I didn't enjoy them personally, but you know, plenty of people did, and that, you know, clearly they resonated with people. They were good in their own way. But this idea of it being unfilmable was kind of, in my personal opinion, and I think the opinions of many other people, like that idea was canned by Jackson's success in making his films. But the scope and the scale of the Second Age is just, it's different. There's a cosmic aspect to it, not as cosmic as the First Age, but there's still a very cosmic aspect of the Second Age that that has a scale and a scope and a depth that I think is another level up. And so the idea of being unfilmable kind of is in a way resurrected, and I liked that the article acknowledged that, and like, you know, that they really devoted time to talking about the showrunner Patrick McKay and J.D. Payne and their awareness of it and their perspective on addressing that. I have to admit that I think they had a quote in the article about you know, writing the novel that Tolkien never wrote, and that was, I think that was one of the lines that kind of made me a bit meh, because it's a very ambitious and, dare I say, arrogant statement to purpose to write, you know, a novel in the vein of Tolkien. I mean, I'm a fan fiction writer writing a novel-length fanfic, and I wouldn't like dare to say that this is a novel that Tolkien would have written, you know, because he's the only one that can write his novels. Ultimately, we can make adaptations, we can make extrapolation, we can make fan works and fanfic and fan multi-billion-dollar TV series. But I think that maybe it's just their wording that came across as arrogant, but I think that that's a reason for caution, and I do hope, I mean, I'm getting the impression that they're tempering their ambition with like a genuine desire to make the best product that they can possibly make. I have my reservations about how much the fact that this is a big budget production would impact, you know, their ability to, I guess, channel that passion, because I mean, there's like, you know, studios always have a lot of invasive control over end products. I mean, just look at what happened to the Hobbit films, where a lot of the problems were basically from studio intervention, and, you know, the Jackson and his team having to deal with that. But, you know, you go back to the production of The Lord of the Rings, which in many ways, like, you know, the cast and the crew themselves spoke about how it so often it felt like basically producing an indie film. Like, that was the vibe that was on set, in terms of, you know, even how they were just operating in their day-to-day, and also in terms of how they were making the story come to life, how they were, you know, workshopping, you know, scenes, writing them, blocking them, acting them, how they were creating their props, their set design, everything. And I just don't know the extent to which we get that kind of, I guess, that kind of deeply earnest energy when it's such a big budget production. Almost like a too big to fail one, if that makes sense. I'm not saying that it's not gonna fail. It always runs the risk of doing that. But there's like a there's a difference when it's like, you know, Peter Jackson and his team directing the film, and then like Jeff Bezos with the kinds of, you know, resources he has, where he can basically do whatever the hell he wants. I think that's the main reason that I was concerned about that statement, because, you know, the ambitiousness of it, I feel like ambitiousness can be more earnest when you know that there's more at stake, if that makes sense. Like, you know, if Fellowship of the Ring 2001 had tanked, then the next two films like wouldn't have been made, pretty much, I think. But I'm not sure that that would be the case with this production, you know, because Bezos himself is so invested in it, like personally, not just financially. But that's my thought on that, that aspect of the story. The other thing that came out of the article was confirmed something that, you know, I think a lot of us had been discussing, those of us who were following the series, which was how they were going to deal with the Second Age, because the Second Age is a long period of time. It is 3,441 years, if I'm remembering my numbers correctly. It's quite a long period of time. A lot of events happen. And basically the only consistent characters that you would have throughout that series are the immortal ones. The mortals will come and go. And so when it came to like thinking about how to adapt that, I can understand why they went for timeline compression. Like, I get it. It makes sense, and I can see like logical ways that they could do it, you know? So for example, I could see how you could conflate Tar Minastir, a Númenorian king who, during the War of the Elves and Sauron, which began in the year 1693 of the Second Age, towards the end of the War of the Elves and Sauron, he sent the Númenorian forces to Middle-earth because of the alliance with Gil-galad. And I could see how you could you know, merge that storyline with Ar-Pharazôn, who later in the third millennium, I don't remember the exact date, when he is basically, Sauron takes over large parts of Middle Earth. He starts calling himself, King of Men and Lord of the Earth, and Ar-Pharazôn is like, bitch, those are my titles. Because Ar-Pharazôn is a power-hungry asshole. I'm not an Ar-Pharazôn fan. I mean, there are different notions of canon. Tolkien did kind of rewrite the whole storyline with him and Tar Miriel. But I go with the first version of the story I read, where he basically took her by force as a wife and kind of stole her crown out from under her. So yeah, I don't like him. He's an interesting character, but I don't like him. But anyway, I can see how you could kind of merge those two storylines together, right? Because ultimately it's Sauron wreaking havoc on the free peoples of Middle Earth and fucking up their lives. And then I could easily see a strong Númenórean king coming out of the west with his powerful navy, with his famous archers, and going and like wrecking Sauron. And you could easily make the compression in that way. And then just go, basically straight into the corruption of Númenor after that. And, of course, there would be build up before that happens, because as far as I can tell, Sauron doesn't seem to be a noticeable presence in this first season, just like going off everything we know and the rumors that he might not even show up in the first season, giving me the impression that, he's going to be very much a murmur in the background. I mean, the article speaks about how Galadriel is, she has that intuition. That was what J.A. Bayona in his quote in the article talked about, like this idea of intuition and knowing that something is wrong and trying to warn people about it. I mean, that has basis in canon. That's how Galadriel reacted to the notion of darkness creeping along the coasts and from the east of Middle Earth. There's some great stuff about her geopolitical maneuvers early in the Second Age, before 1693. I wrote a paper about it, and I will make a video about it at some point as well. But I can definitely see that kind of like dominating the first season, so Sauron's not really there. And then we have latter seasons to explore, and I guess compress the stories of Tar Minas Tirith and Ar-Pharazôn into one moment of the Númenórean intervention in Middle Earth and Sauron's surrender and being brought to Númenor. And that would of course mean that the forging of the rings, which is very much the centerpiece of this show, they talk about that in the article a lot, like this hinges so much on the rings, how they're forged, who they're given to, how they're used, which makes me excited about ring wraiths. I have a sneaking suspicion that one of the original characters, Halbrand, could maybe be a ring wraith. It would be cool. I think it would be cool. Get emotionally invested in him in the first season, and then watch his corruption arc to become a ring wraith. But yeah, that would give options to, I guess, explore the forging of the rings prior, and then War of the Elves and Sauron gets conflated with the later intervention of Ar-Pharazôn. It makes sense to me. I can see how the timeline compression would work. However, it does leave some questions and doubts. One thing I'm sad about means we probably won't see Aldarion and Erendis, as at least not in the format that we know, not in the way their tale is told in the story, because that tale is irrevocably tied up with the pre-1693 politics of the Second Age and the pre-1693 Númenórean colonialism along the shores of Middle Earth, Aldarion's logging, for example. The haven at Vignalonde, there was a major battle there during the War of the Elves and Sauron, which is where he was routed, and the Númenóreans kind of came. So maybe they'll transplant his story into somebody else's. No idea what that will look like. But it's a shame that we kind of we won't, if with the timeline compression, because that storyline takes place so many thousands of years before Ar-Pharazôn and is bound up in those kinds of politics. We're not, I think, going to see, because Aldarion obviously would become king. And Ar-Pharazôn is already in the cast, so Aldarion can't be king, he can't be prince. So we're not going to see the story in any in a way that's recognizable in that dimension, but maybe we'll see a version of it. But I'm sad, because I really like that storyline, and I like because I'm interested in geopolitics and war. It's what I study. I'm just kind of sad that we're not going to have that, because that Aldarion and Erendis is some of the juiciest Second Age politics stuff. And the other thing is that the thing that I guess I'm more concerned about is that it's going to be harder to kind of convey the stuff that I was talking about earlier about the scale and the age of Middle Earth with the timeline compression, because if Galadriel is still really angry about the first age, even though it would have had to have been a couple of millennia by then, um, it's going to still feel very attached to the first age, and yet we're going to, if we're already talking about characters like Ar-Pharazôn and Isildur and such, like, that brings us extremely close. Like, it's going to be a span of like basically 200 years until the third age. And so, like, my main concern about the timeline compression is that they won't be able to, or they might not be able to channel the kind of scale, and the age and the time that is passing in Middle Earth, um, and kind of the gravity of the events that occur in the second age, and their progression, and the basically the decline and the corruption until that insane conclusion. I guess, like, we won't get the sense of the rings as more than just a crisis point, but as an ongoing security issue, basically from the middle of the second age. Something that's just kind of like always in everybody's mind, because Sauron has the ring for thousands of years, and that's not good. And he's a menace. He's a menace to generations of humans. In a way, I understand, because when you have a series with such a long time span, well, a story with such a long time span, your series will inevitably have to follow some characters that can maintain that lifespan. So the elves, but that basically limits your cast of characters, of recurrent characters, just to the immortals, and you would have to have a rotating cycle of humans. And like, I mean, I have an elf bias, so that would work great for me, but I can see why, I guess, Amazon might not be so into that. That may not be their interest as a production company, or whoever's like steering the creative vision for that, the showrunners as well as the people at Amazon. Maybe it's not the avenue that they want to explore. They want human characters that you can connect with over the entire 5 seasons. I mean, I get it. It makes intellectual sense. I just don't agree with it, because humans are cool, but I like them in their small mortal doses, and I like seeing the different generations, which we're not going to get as much of a sense of, I think, the age of Numenor and its descendants and everything, and how those descendants changed over the generations, how policy changed over the generations. Those are my main issues with the timeline compression. That said, I really don't know what they could have done to adapt these stories for the small screen otherwise, or the big screen for that matter, but the small screen, it was just much better to serialize these stories in the first place. If it was me making it, personally, I would have pitched an anthology instead. I think anthology series work great. You can put lots of nice, interesting connecting threads through them. You don't have to do each season, in chronological order either. You can go back and forth with things. I feel like an anthology series would have worked really well as well. But they've decided to go the route of a timeline compression, so I just hope that the writing can hold up to that and can convey the sense of scale and age and cosmic background to the second age that exists in the text. And that will really just come down to the writers and the showrunners, and we'll just have to wait and see to see whether they can pull it off. I guess the next thing to talk about is the new characters. Very exciting. We got some character confirmations in this, so to match up to the posters that we've seen. There's a dwarven princess Disa, the sylvan elf Arondir, the human Bronwyn, the man I mentioned, Halbrand. We have 2 hobbit characters that we know. We have the mysterious man in the meteorite. We have Lenny Henry's character, but we don't know their names yet. And we also got to see cast photos for Galadriel and Elrond. I may consider unpacking, my initial impressions about how they're visualizing the canon characters at some point, so like Elrond and Galadriel. But when it comes to the other characters, the original characters created for the series, they say there's going to be a cast of 22 mains, which is exciting. And so far we've had a majority of the confirmed names seem to be original characters, which I'm not against, because the second age has it has few named characters, to be honest, especially like outside of like kings and elves. You don't have a lot of named characters. And frankly, as much as I like that, it would be so boring. You would not have a populated world if you just focus on the kings and the elves. So, especially if you want to make this last for 5 seasons. So, great. I love that they're introducing new characters. I love that they're taking risks with them. Maybe not as many risks as I would like. I would have loved if Disa could have had a full beard. But other than that, like, I like that they're exploring, these new characters are coming from, different cultures, and that they're coming from different parts of Middle Earth, different social strata. Disa is a dwarven princess. Arondir, he looks like he could be a march warden. Bronwyn, I love this. She's a single mother with a kid living in a village. Like that's and she's a healer. I think it said. I think that's beautiful. I love to see that in the story. Especially because Middle Earth, what we have textually, there's so many textual ghosts. Like we know that there are like moms and sisters and that sort of thing in Middle Earth, but we don't hear about them. We just hear about their brothers, and we hear about their dads, and we hear about their sons, and it's like okay, great, but when we're creating original characters, we can bring those textual ghosts back to life, So I'm really excited that they're exploring these characters that absolutely exist in Middle Earth, and I'm really looking forward to where the route they're going to take with them. I think the one that I personally was most ecstatic about was Ismael Cruz Cordoba's character, Arondir. He's a Sylvan Elf original character. I was so stoked about that because when way back when they first announced Rings of Power, back when it was just Lord of the Rings on Prime, and they showed that first set of cast photos, when I saw Ismail's photo, the first thing that sprang into mind was, oh my god, he needs to play an elf. Like, such a beautiful face. His eyes so like magnetic. I don't know how to describe it. I was like, they were so intense and beautiful, and I was like, he gives me such strong elf vibes, and I was like, he needs to play an elf. I thought personally he would make a brilliant Celebrimbor. Like he gave off Celebrimbor energy. And then last week when they released the character posters, and I saw the one with the wooden armor, which instantly screamed Sylvan Elf to me, and I looked at the hands and I was like, those could totally be Ismail's hands. Like I can see that. And then I got really excited because I was like, I love Sylvan Elves as well, and like I really hope that Ismail is gonna play Sylvan Elf. And then guess what? Ismail is playing a Sylvan Elf. All my dreams came true. I'm so happy. Like that was great. That was like the best kind of confirmation I could have gotten. I maintain that he would have made an excellent Celebrimbor, but I'm sure that Charles Edwards, who's playing Celebrimbor, will be great in the role. I've been pretty sick seeing some of the ageism levied his way. There's all you can, have valid concerns about casting older people as elves, but like, don't insult them and don't insult their appearance. That's just low. So, may not be how I imagine him, but I'm sure he's going to do a great job, even if I'll always view him as Michael Gregson from Downton Abbey. But I still think that the Cruz Cordova would have been an amazing Celebrimbor. But yeah, I'm so pleased that he's playing a Sylvan Elf, and I'm really curious about this storyline that he's gonna have, this forbidden romance with Bronwyn, the human healer. I don't know to what extent they can make overt references, but I really, really, truly hope that the writers will somehow in some way make allusions to Aegnor and Andreth, who were a couple in the first age of Middle Earth. Aegnor is actually Galadriel's brother. He was a elf warrior who fell in love with Andreth, who is a mortal, and they couldn't get married because laws and customs of the Eldar dictate that the elves don't marry in times of war, and Aegnor stuck to that code pretty closely, and basically they never like really officially became a thing. Basically they couldn't marry, and then he went and died. Spoiler alert, it's not a spoiler, everybody dies in the Silmarillion, okay? None of your faves survive unless your fave is like Elrond or like Galadriel. I'm just telling you now, like, get used to it, prepare for it, everybody's gonna die. And there's this beautiful and heartbreaking piece from the Histories of Middle Earth, I can't remember which volume, called the Athribeth Finroda Andreth, which is the conversation between Finrod and Andreth, and it's basically a rumination about the differences between the fates of elves and the fates of men. And you know, there's like, it's such a gorgeous exchange between Andreth and Finrod. Finrod also being Galadriel's brother, which according to the article is something that she's still big mad about, because guess who killed him? Boy, Mr. Rings. He killed Finrod Fellegund, which was a dick move because Finrod is amazing and he deserved better. But he went out like a champ. He wrestled a werewolf to death, and he saved Beren, the man who was in love with the elf Luthien. It's just, I don't know. There's so much connections, like, with that kind of, those, like, links between elf and man, like, romances. Elf and Edain, perhaps is a better way to say it. And I just kind of hope they make allusions to that, because, you know, like, everybody talks about, like, you know, how it was so important every time there was an elf and human romance, that it was always highlighted as something, like, big and impressive. And it's like, I get that, I understand it, but I kind of feel like, and this comes back to the idea of Middle-earth as a frame narrative, because it is, like, that's how Tolkien framed it. The Lord of the Rings is the Red Book of Westmarch. The Silmarillion, the contents of, like, the First and Second Ages, were written by Elvish scholars, Pengoloth, Rumil. These characters, like, wrote these stories, and they were passed down through the Númenóreans to the Gondorians, you know, retold and augmented by the hobbits. When it gets to the appendices, like, which is what the show is drawing on, these stories have in universe passed through so many hands, with all of these different characters with their specific biases. It's my view that the frame of textual bias actually allows a lot of freedom when it comes to adaptation and talking about, you know, the universe and the, I guess, the limitations of what we know about Middle-earth. And I like the idea that these kinds of, you know, elf-man relationships, you know, could have occurred on the fringes without entering the great tales, especially if there were no, you know, children born out of it, or that had great fates attached to them. Of course, we don't know whether, because Bronwyn's a single mother, we don't know if her child is Arondir's child, but I guess we'll find that out and see. But I'm not averse to there being that forbidden romance. I hope it has shades of Aignor and Andreth in it, because that would just be beautiful. It would be a wonderful vehicle for making that storyline have thematic resonance with the rest of the Legendarium. I don't know if Amazon will do it. I don't know if they can. I don't know if the writers want to. I hope it's just not going to be a shallow romance. I hope it'll draw on, there's so much of the Legendarium that they could draw on, even, you know, in a really tangential way, so as not to break what they have licensed. But we'll see, I suppose. But I'm just generally really happy about Arondir, and I'm really looking forward to, like, his storyline. And I also hope that, you know, there's also this, like, slight discomfort, because, you know, the Sylvan elves, they were colonized peoples. They were colonized by Galadriel and Lothlorien. They were colonized by Thranduil and Oropher as well, but in slightly different ways, which I will talk about at some point, because Elvish colonialism in the Second Age is interesting. Or, well, you could call it colonialism, you could call it imperialism. There are a few different angles you could define it as. I might actually prefer to say imperialism rather than colonialism. Anyway, the Sylvan elves were a colonized peoples, and they are described in the Hobbit as less wise and more dangerous. And, you know, casting a person of color in that role, you know, of a group that's described in that way, is a little bit uncomfortable. But my hope is, again, drawing on the idea of a frame narrative, is that the writers will be able to subvert that, you know? I mean, it's let's be real, the Silmarillion is just Noldor propaganda. I just hope that, I think there's a great opportunity here to subvert the expectations of what people learn through Bilbo biased Baggins's report. As we know from The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit is an incredibly unreliable text about the in-universe assumptions about Middle-earth. And so, yeah, I mean, I hope I don't know if the show, I don't know the extent, the awareness of the writing team about these themes, but I'm just holding on to the hope that they'll take the opportunity to subvert some of them, because they have a great opportunity to do so. And in my view, they have textual justification for it based on the frame narrative idea of Middle-earth. That's what I think. We know Bilbo Baggins is an unreliable narrator, so lean into that. But yeah, I'm really disappointed in the racism, the overt racism that has been shown ever since the release of the posters. You know, there are genuine good faith criticisms about some of the changes, some of the risks that this adaptation is going to run headlong into. And I appreciate them, and like I debate them whether or not I agree with them. That's great. But a lot of the time, once you start to really interrogate some of these arguments, they just devolve into the root of where they come from, and that's being angry that not 100% of the cast members are white. You know, so much of it has been couched in false concern about the integrity of the story and the canon, which, by the way, is a mess. Canon is an absolute clusterfuck when it comes to Tolkien. Anybody who has read further than just the Silmarillion, if you've read the Unfinished Tales, the Histories of Middle-earth, the Letters, you know, canon is an absolute mess when it comes to Tolkien. They also couch it in concern about his mythology of England, and I am going to link in the description an excellent blog post by Dr. Luke Shelton that, you know, interrogates and in many ways just completely dismantles the idea of, you know, the mythology for England idea. But ultimately, like, all of these things are covers for the racism that a vocal sect of the fandom has, and sometimes I question what these people are actual fans, that they have chosen to direct their energies towards. And I think, you know, an important thing for us to do is to be able to strike the balance between, you know, addressing that racism head on and also directing our energies towards, you know, supporting and uplifting the actors of color and engaging positively with the fandom and encouraging and uplifting fans of color and scholars of color. I'm just using that terminology, by the way, like the of color terminology, because it's the most, I think it's the most popularized in the Anglophone world because of the racial context in the United States. I'm not from the United States. It's personally not how I would generally refer to non-white people in my day-to-day, but I'm just adopting it for ease of communication, since it's, I think at this point in the Anglophone sphere, it's the best way to convey this idea. But yeah, I wanted to acknowledge that. I wanted to acknowledge and talk about the racism because it's ridiculous, and I know people personally who have been strongly affected by it, and I feel strongly about it too. And yeah, I also just want to make it clear, it wasn't clear already, that I do not provide any space for bigotry or hatred on my YouTube channel or on my Twitter spaces or anywhere else. You have no place and you have no power here. I think such views are offensive. I think they are an affront to Tolkien and everything that he stood for and everything his stories stand for. And I think it's disgusting that his works are being used to parrot such hateful ideas that he himself would have been opposed to. You know, not that we should like dictate our morality based on what, you know, one person said in one part of his life, but I mean, are you really sure that you're defending the author when his own statements show that he would have vehemently opposed the kinds of racist vitriol that, you know, that so many of these people are leveraging against the actors? But ultimately, if you're a racist, you're not welcome here. I'm going to use my space and my platform to have great discussions with open-minded people and to uplift marginalized people who are feeling hurt and who are feeling excluded from this fandom when they should not be, because Tolkien is literally for everybody. Moving on from that, I then want to talk about, I think, the quote they quoted Dr. Dimitra Fimi, who's an amazing scholar. And by the way, on the topic of race, I highly recommend her book Tolkien, Race and Cultural History. It is a seminal volume. It also addresses the English myth thing that I mentioned, among so many other things. Great piece of scholarship and essential reading, in my opinion, for anybody who's interested in Tolkien studies. But anyway, so Dimitra was quoted in the Vanity Fair article talking about the concerns of, you know, this series becoming the next Game of Thrones, which, you know, wouldn't jive with, you know, how we envision Tolkien's work and would be derivative of, you know, Game of Thrones and the idea that Amazon is basically, you know, capitalizing on that. And that's it's a really fair assessment, and the article makes it clear that no, we're not going to see Westerosi levels of sex or violence in this show. It seems like it's going to be basically like a PG-13 kind of production, which is, I mean, like, so in one sense that's reassuring. So we're not going to see that kind of like grim dark aspect of fantasy world building, because like Middle Earth is dark. It's really dark, and in many ways it engages with themes of hopelessness, but unlike Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire, that kind of leans into the idea that an individual can't like make a difference in the world because the world is shit. I mean, it's an interesting perspective. I appreciate the role that grimdark has as a genre. I described it really badly just then, but like, yeah, shit summary of grimdark. But I don't think that suits Lord of the Rings, because it's like, I saw it described once as noble dark, because it's really dark universe, dark themes, bittersweet endings for everybody and every storyline. But there's always Tolkien's idea of eucatastrophe, of something good coming in, like right at the end. There's the idea of individuals and smaller people moving the wheels of the world while the wise are looking elsewhere. That was a really bad paraphrase of an actual quote from Lord of the Rings. And there's also Tolkien's ideas of hope, Amdir and Estelle, with Estelle being the one that's kind of the really like more, it's very much a faith kind of hope. Like, you have no basis for that hope, but you just lean all into it because everything is terrible, and you just have to hope that things are going to be better. And it's like it's that idea of faith and hope intertwined together, which is beautiful, and that's essential to Tolkien. So like, to come back to the thing, I 100% like appreciate the thing of how it's like not going to be Game of Thrones in that way. But I personally prefer a darker view of the Second Age. I think the Second Age has a lot of really fucked up material that you can lean into. I mean, the First Age too. I think the First and Second Ages are very, very dark. There's all sorts of really difficult themes in the Second Age. You have, spoiler alert, I'm just saying, I mean, these stories have been out for ages, but since the series is coming out, spoiler alert, I guess. You have Celebrimbor, who ends up, tortured by Sauron and then killed and impaled on a banner and shot through with arrows, Saint Sebastian style. You have Sauron's satanic cult on Numenor, and him performing human sacrifice and everything. I mean, like, it's and Numenor basically descending into like hedonism and like the streets like the purge and all, like, by the end of days for them. So it's like it's really dark. There's so much like there's so many political machinations in the Second Age as well. And I personally, like, when it comes to like reading and writing fan works, I like a darker take on the Second Age, and I like leaning into those more, I guess, mature themes that it engages with. But I can see why they would want to go at a level that's PG-13 and appealing to a broader demographic. I can see they don't want to alienate the mass audience. I get that, like, 100%. Again, I can rationalize and intellectually appreciate the decision they're making. I wish it was otherwise. Not, like I said, not like the Westerosi levels and approach to, like, violence and sex and political intrigue, but just like something that's a bit more dark and a bit more intense. I would have appreciated that. So ultimately, I was actually pretty encouraged by what I read in the Vanity Fair article. It seems there's a lot of passion, it seems there's a lot of creativity, there's an awareness of the epic scale of the work that they're dealing with that was really emphasized in many ways. But like I said, I have my enthusiasms and I have my concerns about this and how it's going to play out. But ultimately, I'm going into this with a positive mindset because I have no expectations. I don't expect this to be an adaptation, a one-on adaptation, because there couldn't be one. I don't expect this Middle Earth to look like the Middle Earth that's in my head. I'm just expecting this as Amazon's Middle Earth, and I'm going to explore it and see what I can take away from it. And I guess the writing will determine whether I get emotionally invested or whether I just watch this as entertainment and getting to enjoy somebody else's take on Middle Earth ultimately. I suppose one thing that I'm curious about is also kind of like what my own reaction is going to be to going back to Middle Earth, because like that's the great question, right? It's like, what does it actually mean to me as a person to go back to Middle Earth? Because now we're going to have new visual and auditory phenomena to associate Middle Earth with, and I actually don't know how I'm going to react to that, because Middle Earth for me, it's not like the feeling of it isn't just Peter Jackson's films. Even though that's how I was introduced, even that's how I kind of like got the initial vibes of it, you know, it's so much more than those films to me now. It's also the stories that I read, the First and Second Age. It's Tolkien's letters and the histories, the unfinished tales. It's the fan fictions I've read, the fan art I've viewed. Like Middle Earth means so many different things to me now. And I guess I'm curious to my own reaction. Like, will it feel like a homecoming? And if it does feel like a homecoming, what does that mean about my own reception as a fan? When it comes to Middle Earth, you know, like what will my reaction illustrate about what I see as the linchpin of what makes Middle Earth to me? I mean, I do think that ultimately it will come down to the idea of unattainable vistas, because that's how I got into Lord of the Rings in the first place. If you watch the first video that I will have linked in the description, I talk about that, how that's like in the Jackson films, that was the first thing that drew me in, when they were in the mines of Moria and you saw that they were ruined and you saw all this old history and these unspoken stories about what lies in the deep places of the world. And when I was reading The Lord of the Rings for the first time, that was the same impression that I got. That was the same thing that drew me in. The scale of the Silmarillion juxtaposed against its, like, you know, very, you know, intimate character moments, was also like what I was so into. Like, you know, that basically that balance between the small and the epic, the grandiose, the legendary. If they were able to capture that, I think that that might really be the linchpin of my Middle Earth experience. And so I suppose that's what I'll really be looking out for, and that will determine whether I feel like I've gone back to Middle Earth or not. And then I guess we'll just see what happens from there. So by the time this is posted, we'll be a few hours away from the release of the teaser trailer. I will be posting my thoughts on that in the coming week, either the 15th or the 16th of February, once I'm finished my finals. And I mean, I'm really excited for that. I'm curious to see how the trailer is going to be. But yeah, thank you for watching. Feel free to share your thoughts. Again, if you're here to engage in good faith, excellent. If you're going to be racist, then you're not welcome here and you will be blocked. If you enjoyed this video, then please leave a like. Feel free to subscribe as well, and you can hit the little bell to get a notification the next time a video comes up. Once the trailer drops and once I've made that video, most likely the Rings of Power content will reduce on this channel for a little while, because there's so much other Legendarium stuff that I want to talk about. So yeah, definitely look forward to that. And I will be putting all of my Rings of Power stuff into a playlist as well. So if you really want to follow that content, then you'll be able to see it in that playlist. So yeah, thank you again for watching, and I'll see you next time. Ciao.